Well, we've got another great show for you today, but first, we gotta listen to that funky beat.
YOLO! Hosted by Jonathan Hayashi and Brandon Boatner. Ordinary Radicals brought to you. Which podcast is about discipleship and biblical living, featuring conversations, Q&As concerning a wide variety of topics to help you grow as disciples of the local church through leadership, discipleship, mission. Boom, drop the mic. YOLO.
You just really said YOLO, right?
I did.
You only live once, which besides the theological inaccuracy and confusion of all this, that is like from 3 or 4 years ago. You're starting to show your age, Mr. Hayashi, Dr. Hayashi.
Dude, it's more like probably 10 years ago, actually, YOLO.
Okay. So, I was trying to be nice.
Jesus would say YOLO.
Would he?
I don't know. I mean, he lived twice.
Exactly. Yeah.
So maybe he wouldn't say that.
Maybe in a sarcastic tone. Anyway, we got a great show today. We're talking about something that is near and dear to both of our hearts, and it should be to every single Christian. And to introduce this, I just want to bring up something that happened to me recently. Recently, I was talking to one of my family members, and that family member experienced some sexual abuse by the hands of someone else. And I was talking to that person, and I felt to share something from my own past, that I experienced sexual abuse as a youngster. And I was telling that person to kind of try to relate and try to empathize a little bit and love them well. Well, fast forward, a couple days goes by, and I was talking to another family member about sort of what had happened a little bit. And that family member told me that they were sexually abused by someone totally different. And so here we have 3 different people, and really none of us knew that any of this existed. I sat down with a pastor yesterday. I told that pastor the story, and he said, actually, Brandon, I was sexually abused also. So we're talking about this idea of sexual abuse and the secrecy surrounding all of this. It's going to be a good show, I think.
I think that's definitely a hot, difficult, sensitive topic, right? So episode 31, we're going to be talking about sexual abuse in the church. But yeah, I just kind of, if it's all right, I just want to piggyback on that. So I remember I was in high school and taking human anatomy class, and the teacher was talking about body parts and talking about how somebody inappropriately touched them in a way that was not God honoring. And then it hit me suddenly. I was like, whoa. When I was super little, probably like 2 or 3 years old, I was abused, and that cycle continued. And it was something that I didn't even recognize. I subconsciously suppressed and hid it. And it just hit me after 12 years of not even dealing with it, 13, whatever. And it's amazing how these memories can flood, and just realize how it's a real thing, and it's out there, and it's not just a taboo. It happens sadly. And I think churches need to have a plan, like how to walk forward and how to understand this. Even biblically, what's going on there.
Yeah. So between you and I, we know a lot about each other, and neither one of us knew that the other was abused in any way. I think one of the big issues surrounding this whole topic is secrecy. And I want to speak to that just a little bit, because I see a lot of secrecy within God's church, and I don't think that there should be. I think this probably came about from just the suppression of sexuality in general. Over the past years and years and decades and hundreds of years, sex is a subject that isn't talked about in the church. It's becoming more prevalent now, but in the past, can you name us? Do you know a pastor who went through a series on Song of Solomon?
Oh, no, definitely not.
No, and I don't either. And it's like, why not? And it's because we're afraid to go there. And we're sending this message, even though sex happened before sin. It's good. It was definitely happening after, but it came before. We have this message that it's bad, that it's not it needs to be kept secret. And I think that has fueled a lot of the atmosphere of secrecy within the church. And I was telling you earlier, I think whenever there's an atmosphere of secrecy, that's the devil's playground to do a lot of damage in the lives of people.
I thought it's interesting, I think about Genesis 3, right, where Adam and Eve sinned by eating the fruit, right? It was pleasant to the eyes, make one wise, and it was something that to be desired.
Right.
It's kind of like what First John 2, right, talks about the lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, and pride of life. But immediately, I think what's interesting is that they started putting fig leaves around them, right? Because they knew there was something shameful, and they started covering. There's a sense that that it's a hush topic, right? Sex,
right?
But even recently, I was preaching about what sex is, and actually biblical sex is actually a very, very beautiful thing, right? I can't remember who said this, but they said, sex actually communicates that I completely, permanently, exclusively belong to you. I mean, it's one of the greatest gifts that you can have between a husband and wife. It should be cherished, but it's almost like, oh my goodness, so that's a bad topic. Let's not talk about it. Let's try to avoid it as much. But let's talk about other issues in life. And something that we should teach and shepherd and help our people, or else then, it's something that our children are learning not from the home, but they're learning in public school. And obviously that's not a biblical based sex. And then there's shame that surrounds that, kind of like how Adam and Eve fell.
Exactly. And so if we within the church have sort of secrecy, and we know that we shouldn't, the question becomes like, how do we change the atmosphere? How do we create a place that's safe? One, to talk about the goodness of sex, and maybe that's not the topic of our podcast today, but two, that if someone is a survivor, if someone's being abused, that they know that they can approach a leader or someone and bring the darkness to light. That we could stand for survivors of sexual abuse. And as we said, you're a survivor, and I'm a survivor, and I have family members that are a survivor. The pastor, there's so many. We can't just be idle about this.
Mm-hmm. One of the things I love talking about is just serving those who are survivors. So again, the topic is sexual abuse in the church. And I think first and foremost, we got to create a safe environment. The secrecy needs to stop. And I think a lot of abusers, predators will talk about, don't tell mom and dad, right?
Right.
About these things. And that there needs to be even educating our children, and so we have these talks with our little children, heaven forbid, but I have a 6-year-old, and talk about, this is only mom and dad, and maybe doctors can only see you without your clothes. And so helping them in a healthy way to have conversation. Also, something real quick, I think a quick note for those maybe pastor leaders, ministry partners who are listening. I think one of the first things, if you find out that somebody is being abused, whether a teenager or whatever, I think just a moment to stop and listen is huge. And in the way that you listen and attitude is huge. Not begin to, interrogate, saying like, what kind of clothes were you wearing? Why were you there alone?
Right.
Because then shame is going to come upon the survivors again. Exactly. And they're never going to talk about it. They took the courage, willingness, because they saw something in you and to trust you and to talk to you. So one of the first things you should really do is sympathize with the survivors and just say, I'm so sorry this happened, and not to doubt, and to shame them. Somehow they made a mistake. It was their fault.
Right. Yeah. So you brought up a lot of things I want to walk into. One, you talked about predators. If you're listening now, you have to know this. If you're a pastor, a lot of the people that seem like they're heaven sent, there's a reason why they feel that way. And they might just be predators. Like there could be a person in your children's ministry who's like, yeah, I just want to come in and I want to give my weekends and I just want to do this and this. And you're like, this person's directly from God. I am so excited. I've been praying for this person. But what you could be doing is opening a door for a predator to take advantage, or for someone to be groomed, or for something bad to happen. And so we need to think of some steps. I'd like to start there. Like, what are some steps that as a pastor, and I have several written down, but maybe even you and your church has taken, Jonathan, that is going to is going to help create a safe place.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the first things is to admit as a church that this is something that's out there. We live in a broken, sinful world.
Yeah.
So, educating your church about the reality of, faith-based organizations are a huge target, and just realize that we don't live in fairy tale with unicorns and donuts and, rainbows. We live in a broken world, and to be prepared. And I think preparedness is usually comes with awareness, right? And then also began with awareness to put some ideas of policies and training.
Okay.
I think one of the great training resources we have is called Ministry Safe.
Yeah, that's good.
That brings awareness to your training leaders and sometimes faith-based organizations, because we're desperate and we're small and we need volunteers, that, we don't do background checks. Background checks is one great way to start. It doesn't solve everything, but that's one way to keep the gatekeepers aware that, hey, there's a system where we have, and also communicate, our church, what we communicate, we say we take zero tolerance of sexual abuse.
Right.
For the vulnerable and safety of our children and people, we take it very, very serious.
Yeah, and when you say zero tolerance, you're also saying that everyone has to be a mandated reporter. If you see anything, you must report it. It absolutely is crucial that whatever you see, whatever you heard, and it could be, I heard from such and such, it doesn't matter, we report it, right? Report it to the proper authority within your church. And if you're that person that's reporting, you might even want to follow up. Make sure that it goes from whatever channel it needs to the proper channels also. Another thing that we're doing, and I feel like churches may start moving this direction, maybe you guys have, we're not a big church, but we're about to install cameras in all of our rooms. We're going to have cameras that just show. Now, as you said with background checks, a predator can get around everything. They can, but still, you got to make it as hard as possible and make it as safe as possible. And you can't put a camera in a bathroom or something like that. So I understand that, but at least in all the rooms where we have kids constantly, in our youth room, at the entrance to the building, and all those things, we're about to install several different cameras. And this came up actually in two ways. There's the opposite end of things. There was a child that said that the child said that he was sexually abused by a worker, and they had cameras and they were able to go back to the time and everything and come to find out they had something against the person. And that in ministry, one person accuses you of something, it impacts your integrity.
Yeah. I think kind of piggyback on that too. I just, with the volunteers, we talk about a 2-people rule.
Yes.
Especially in the restrooms too, right? So if there's an accusation, there's another person there who is watching, eyewitness. If security cameras are not an option. Mm-hmm. One of the other things, personally, as a pastor, I've done is that I want to be above reproach. 1 Timothy 3 talks about that. Mm-hmm. So one of the things, we call it the Billy Graham rule. And for me, I just made a rule that I'm just never alone of the opposite sex, except for my wife. Mm-hmm. I remember in student ministry, a teenager would stick around and they need a drive. And then, while the parent didn't come pick them up, maybe I should drive. But then I would think about, what if a member sees me with the teenage girl on the passenger side and I'm driving, even though the thought of intent was good, action doesn't get a pastor out these days anymore. It's an accusation that gets a pastor out. Mm-hmm. So, I think, that's maybe a higher calling for a pastor elder. But just being above reproach and just recognizing hey, we live in a very broken world. I don't meet with baptismal candidates or children, minors alone anymore. I always have to set a parent, at least one in, mm-hmm. and then we meet together and walk through that. And so also just putting some, hedge of protection there in systems, I think that's good. But kind of coming back to the security camera, I think volunteers too. I know it's tough for little churches, but try to get multiple volunteers and 2 set of eyes, just in case if you can't afford or you don't have cameras, that areas that can be seen.
Absolutely. No, I'm with you. And so we're saying, if you're listening right now, we're saying we're protecting the kids, we're protecting our church, we're protecting our pastors. And so all of this, it's a multifaceted issue, right, that we want to deal with. Now, we do have to acknowledge that many of the cases of sexual abuse have come from the hands of someone with some leadership, a deacon, even a minister. Sometimes I've seen that, and so you also need accountability. You need some sort of accountability for where you are and why you're there and your actions. You need to be able to answer for those things. I think accountability can go a long way to stopping something before it happens. We'll just put it that way. And it may be mutual. A lot of the time that there's a minister who's maybe committing adultery, and it may be something mutual between him and some person. Still tears up a church. It's still sexual sin.
And again, like abuse. I mean, and we're specifically talking sexual abuse,
right?
And again, I think abuse is a loaded word. I mean, like, what do you mean by that? I think anything that is not desired or has been pressed upon. So, like, it was kind of realization for me too. There could be a peer-to-peer sexual abuse that could happen of a child to a child because that child has been abused and that person turns to abuser. So even this awareness, like, even how you set up your, Sunday school rooms or how you set up the nursery. So it may not be adult to children. It could be a children, or even let's say a child has a phone and forces to watch pornography of the image or motion that hasn't been desired. That is grooming and that is abuse. Does it make sense? So even that, that's considered in the category of abuse because that's been taken advantage of one person's freedom there.
Right, and they all have different outcomes. But this is an aside. The point: a lot of the people listening right now are probably also parents. You need to know what your kids are looking at. You need to know what your kids' friends show them. And I say that to say, my about to be 9-year-old, he was talking to his mom, and he acknowledged and said someone tried to show him a picture at school, not at church, at school. And so we had to deal with that, and it's like another 9-year-old has a phone and is showing my 9-year-old who does not have a phone inappropriate pictures. You know what I'm saying? So
yeah, we live in a broken world, and it's sad that we're not in 1950s anymore, right?
We can't escape it.
And so much as technological advancement, the abuse cases that are coming out, because again, coming from earlier, you talked about the secrecy that happens, and that's so unfortunate. Yet we just got to be prepared and ready to, as a church, to shift, have flexibility there in leadership structure and systems and strategies in place in order to prevent from greater catastrophic damage that could be done to not only your life, but in your marriage, also in your family and the church.
Yeah. So real quick then, I think maybe there's someone possibly listening and they haven't quite worked out their system for what happens if there's an abuse in their church. So let's talk about the obvious, because it may not be obvious to everyone, okay? So first of all, there's a child that's been abused. The child comes to you. What's the next step? What are we supposed to do? What should we do?
Yeah. And this is probably the counseling side that's coming out of me.
Right.
But I think also, sometimes children would say, I've been struggling. I've never told anybody. I don't want you to tell anybody because my mom's going to be upset and the church leader is going to be upset. Please don't tell anybody. I would say even that secrecy or confidentiality cannot be promised.
It can't.
Because mandatory reporters needs to report such as abuse or other issues. And people say, I would say talk to your appropriate channel of leadership, go through the proper protocol and process by bringing it up, and because you have the information and to act upon it and to do something about it. I would say, I would never promise anybody that I'm not going to tell, but I will openly say, unless it's about child molestation or abuse that is happening, right? So I think that's important as we first find out. whether people say, please don't tell anybody, but for the safety of the person and to find a predator, to do greater damage, I think secrecy needs to die. That's my first step.
Yeah, and the same thing's true for us. If something comes to light, we will make a call. There will be a call. And if you don't know, there's you need to find the number. And I don't have it in front of me. Maybe we can put it in show notes or something. But there's CPS, there's Child Protective Services, there's different groups. But you call and you report. We're mandated reporters as pastors, and we call and we report what we've heard. Doesn't have to be true. We report that we've heard it, and then they will go through the proper channels. This is to protect these kids, right? We have to protect the kids first and foremost. And maybe they are worried. Like, please don't tell someone. I have to tell for your protection and because I love you. I care about you. So you have to report that, and then you need to have steps where you're talking to the different channels, because even in your own church, you're going to want to try to get to the bottom of what happened. You've reported, and you're going to try to get to the bottom of what happened. It could come up that it was a misunderstanding. It could come up all different things, but always err on the side of loving people well and protecting the people that are coming to you with saying that they've been abused.
Yeah, I think it's better to be safe than sorry.
Exactly.
And again, and also recognize the system in place that this could ruin the person's life or the other person's life. Well, if a lot of times sexual abuser predators,
Mm-hmm.
if they're doing it, they have done that for more children, because they have learned how to groom people and work the gatekeeper and get into the system. And just so you know, based on Ministry Safe, there is no visual cues or hints. They're not socioeconomically low-income people, or they're more male. Actually, even females could be predators, believe it or not. Or people who have high-profile jobs, yet they've learned how to get into systems. So you can't really predict, like, well, that person can't do that. This person can't do that. But again, always, trying to work and be faithful to the truth. I think that's just crucial, which is difficult because truth has consequence.
Right.
But to do what's right for the whole.
Right. Now that's a kid. Now, if an adult comes to you, it's a little bit different. You're not calling a specific number. If for that person to go to the authorities, you have to counsel them to go to the authorities. That's how it works with an adult. But still, you can have an investigation within your church and try to get down to the bottom of things. And we want safe churches. So we've already talked about a lot of different things, and we haven't even got to one of the reasons why we even did this podcast. You ready to go there?
Yeah, go ahead.
So if you're listening, if you don't know, Jonathan and we're both Southern Baptist pastors, and within our convention, it has come to light in recent years, but big time in recent weeks, of more than just allegations, some actual sexual abuse within local churches and the leadership of the SBC. That's the Southern Baptist Convention. And there's been some cover up. There's been different things. And so we want to talk about that too.
Yeah. I think first and foremost, I think we as leaders should lament.
Absolutely.
To grieve over sin. I mean, Christ would. And just, it doesn't matter the number, like 100, 300, 700 allegation. That's one too many.
Mm-hmm.
And as leaders, we see sin as God sees sin, and we need to call it out and to grieve with our people and to listen to them and to, 1 Corinthians 1:3, it says, "Blessed be the God the Father, the God of all mercies, the God of all comfort," and to help weak and the weary souls in these areas. And we want to walk alongside of them and to point them to Scripture, point them to Jesus, talk about what biblical reconciliation and forgiveness looks like. And I think God's word is sufficient to help us. with that. But first and foremost, we need to lament and say, Lord, have mercy. I think that's a place to start.
If you're not from the Southern Baptist background, then your go-to start might be, well, we need to fire a bunch of pastors from churches and things that have allegations against them. I just so you know, sort of the polity of the way the Southern Baptists are. Each church is its own government. It's its own place. It's its own institution. And we hold that very highly. And there is no governmental board over us that will fire one of our pastors. It doesn't work that way. So we do have a president of the Southern Baptist Convention, and we have an executive committee and people that do some of the day-to-day type stuff, but they can't fire a pastor in any way. So that's not an option. Lamenting, yes, let's lament. One of the things that I would like to see from our executive committee, from our leadership, from our the president of the executive committee, is I want to see some sort of program in place where there are a trained counselor or trained counselors when someone has an issue or has been involved in abuse, that they can either go to their pastor and their pastor can go with them online and talk to this person, or they can go directly to that person. I want to see some help for people who are abused. Counseling, next steps, because a lot of the time, people just don't know what to do next. They're just scared and they feel alone. That's the secrecy. So that's what I would like to see with the SBC.
Yeah, like you said, I think SBC is unique. It's one of the largest. It is the largest Protestant denomination in the evangelicals. But we are not like Catholics, right? There is a pope and a priest and a bishop, that hierarchy. We're not like the Methodists, which there's a DS supervisor who can move pastors. The power lies within the messengers of the people. And that's the reason like the annual meeting is crucial, that people bring resolutions and a system in place. We believe in the autonomy of the church, but what holds us together is the biblical doctrine of conviction of the BFN 2000, which is the Baptist Faith Methodist 2000. And that works with the state and the local. But I think these conversations are good. I think people have not had enough conversations with this. And yes, certainly we want to be about the Great Commission. We're known for the Great Commission. We want to see baptism. And this is an issue we have to walk through and get over it. Sure, I love to see our church more planting churches out there. I want to send more missionaries out. Where my passion lies is where I disciple young seminary students and they're going on following God's call. But we have to deal with this. That's part of taking out fire. But let's take out the fire. Let's deal with this, lament, grieve over it. But let's, in reaction, plan a process, like you said, that will help our pastors and resources to care well for survivors, and also a system in place that if we know for certain there are actual abusers, a system or something in place that will collect them and to not have them transferred to another church so they go ahead and abuse more people. I think that's important. I think we're moving in that direction though, but we got to be praying that a system would be created and awareness and conversations are happening in the same place, like maybe this podcast is, to help our churches so we can move forward, so that we can be about the Great Commission. I want to see more men, women, young boys and girls to be saved, baptized, added to the church. And that's what we're about. That's what it means, SBC, to be on mission together.
Man, I love it. I love what you're saying. And I want to echo that if you're outraged over all this, we are too. And I know for sure that there is a younger generation of pastors that will not stand for these types of things. We will see change. We will see in the end coming out as a better, stronger people. I see that there's a revival even coming in the young pastors of the SBC. A lot of us are a little bit more like-minded, and we care about some things that haven't been as important, maybe, like discipleship and counseling and recognizing mental health and all these things, like you said, that haven't been at the center of what we do. It is important to evangelize. It is important to plant churches. It is important to send missionaries out. But the mental health and all those things, that's a daily grind that we need to do more in.
Yep. Yep. Good word, brother. Good word. This is a huge, huge issue. So, I mean, like, we can't cover it, in a 30-minute podcast, but I do think we need to have more of these conversation and to have intelligent conversation without, what Paul said in Romans, like, zeal without knowledge is foolishness. So yeah, like, we are emotionally torn and broken over this, but let's have intellectual biblical conversation that will help our churches to move forward so we can be about the business. But we're not saying this doesn't matter. It is a huge matter, and we're going to deal with that, and move forward. And that's leadership. So that's what I'm hoping and praying as a whole for the SBC and just even churches in general, evangelicals. Like, this is coming. It's not just an SBC; it's all over the place, and we've got to care well for those who feel helpless and those who are hopeless. And Jesus, He is the hope of the nation. Jesus comes and help weary sinners. And we can look to Jesus. Let's give them Jesus, and let's get a system in place for them to have a safe place to talk and point them to Jesus and to find healing and hope in the name of Jesus. So, enough my preaching.
Amen. I like it. It's good. Well, that's all that I have on the topic. Do you have anything else you wanted to say?
I think that's it. Yeah.
I'm just amazed we got through that in a little over 30 minutes. That's wonderful. Hey, if you've been listening and you're really enjoying these conversations, make sure that you give us 5 stars or give us the highest possible rating. We really would appreciate that. And also go back and check podcasts that you missed. We cover a lot of different things that pastors and clergy and even just Christians are going to deal with in the church on this podcast. So, yeah.
Thanks for your time. Hope to hear from you guys again, and have a blessed week. Ciao.
See you guys.